Yeah. So I want to get back to this um, perversion, I guess you described it, after World War II in the 1950s of making shamanic type people our stars, the rock stars, people like Elvis Presley, James Dean, etc. What I missed that. What the problem there was that that was just fun and that led to the infantilization of our culture. Did the fun part of shamanism rather than what was the serious part that was left out?
Okay, so play and experiment are different categories. Experiment is something that grown-ups do and it's dead serious, right?
Okay.
And play is something that kids do and should do, especially mimicking their parents and grown-ups so they can be grown-ups one day.
Great.
And when you look at play and experiment and you don't know what it is, it can
Mm-hmm.
look identical. And the problem is that the experiments that shamans did looked playful to people who didn't understand it. And that became a major problem. Okay, I even think we actually had 3 world wars in the 20th century. You probably agree with me here, because we had the First World War in Europe, we had the Second World War that involved the whole world, and with the Third World War called the War on Drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And the war on drugs has killed millions of innocent people around the world, especially in Latin America, and has been driven by the United States government.
I have said that word for word, as a matter of fact, Alexander.
It is the Third World War. Now,
Okay.
that is the perfect example of a shamanic ideal, which is to take drugs, which shamans can do without shame because they can handle it mentally. It's part of the personality type. But when the drugs were then widely distributed by, fancy hippies in the 1960s, and they talked about putting LSD in the drinking water, in the tap water, then of course there was this massive reaction against that. There was like a defense mechanism. And the war on drugs was declared naively in the 1970s. They would go after anybody who took any sort of illegal substance, possibly minus alcohol, but anything else was now dangerous. These were ghosts that just took over people, and there had to be a mass exorcism throughout all of our cultures to get these substances out of our systems. This was the new evil, right?
Mm.
And what happened was, of course, the opposite. Instead of having a balanced discussion on which drugs can you take and when in your life, and how can you be guided to take those drugs, and which drugs should you possibly never take, the way you do with medications, instead of having that civilized debate we should have had from the 1970s onward, popular culture threw itself onto this topic, and the drugs became something that was romanticized popular culture, but politically it was opposed aggressively, and billions of dollars were spent on a useless war that killed millions of innocent people, and still does.
Hmm.
The war on drugs still kill far more people than COVID-19 in America every year. It is devastating, and I think we should honestly say that this sort of slow war, the war on drugs begins in the 1970s, should be declared the Third World War and the tragedy. We didn't need nuclear bombs to kill each other. Obviously, we have the war on drugs. But to me, the war on drugs should today be discussed in hindsight like, okay, so how do we get out of it? And what does it mean to legalize drugs, not decriminalize, but legalize drugs? So it's under some kind of a construction that makes sense. And this is where you have to actually talk to shaman people and say, okay, so you as shamans, what are you going to use the drugs for? And probably give them a license to do whatever they want. And if they go and kill themselves with the drugs, then so be it, because it's what shamans do. And then say to the vast majority of people, so you got teenage kids at home. Okay, not a good thing if they start experimenting with DMT when they're 15, and God knows what else they do the next day, and they freak out and end up in psychiatric units where they're 16 with their arms slashed. You don't want that to happen. So how do we scientifically go about the legalization of drugs? Because we both have to do it quickly, but also have to do it scientifically. And I think it makes sense here to philosophically lay the groundwork and say, not all people should be treated equal here, because some people will need these things, medications. Some people can absolutely take them for all kinds of purposes. And some people should be careful with them and probably do some of these things at certain stages in their lives.
Okay. So
So you
Rockstar.
go to the Shikibo tribes in Colombia, they figured it out. They drink ayahuasca for all kinds of purposes. They don't have the depression pandemics that we have in North America and Europe. You can learn from so many of these cultures today. Well, we don't even know shit about in North America and Europe because we've been so damn arrogant. They walk straight into this trap called the war on drugs.